Hi you guys, and welcome back to another makeup and true crime video. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you do, go ahead and hit that like button and make sure to subscribe. It would really mean so much to me and you would never miss another video from me. Today's case is actually an incredible and inspiring story. It's about a brave woman who outsmarted her abductor, and her story was actually made into a Netflix movie called Believe Me, The Abduction of Lisa McVey. And if you guys are interested to learn more about her story, I would highly suggest you go check that movie out. I really enjoyed it. So Lisa McVey was born in March 1967 in Tampa, Florida. And Lisa grew up with her mother and her sister, but there was very little information about her childhood. She had a super difficult start in life. Her mother was an alcoholic and a drug addict who ended up living on the streets. And Lisa and her sister were in and out of foster care due to this. But at age 14, Lisa went to live with her grandmother and her grandmother's boyfriend. And it's not known where her sister lived, but in the movie, they portrayed her sister as living with her mother in a trailer. During the 3 to 4 years that Lisa lived with her grandmother, she suffered intense sexual and emotional abuse at the hands of her grandmother's boyfriend. He would come into her room, hold a gun to her head every time he would abuse her. It is implied that her grandmother was neglectful and resented her, and was most likely aware of the abuse that, you know, her boyfriend was inflicting on Lisa, but she just chose to not do anything about it. By the time Lisa turned 17, she decided that she could no longer cope with the trauma and sadness that was her life, and she decided to end her own life. During this time, Lisa had a job working at the local Krispy Kreme donut shop, and on the night of November 3rd, 1984, she had written her suicide note earlier that day, but she first went to work a double shift at the donut shop and decided that when she returned home, she was going to carry out her plan and end her life. Lisa normally rode a bike to and from her job, and on this night after she finished her double shift, it was around 2 a.m. and Lisa decided to make her way back home like she normally did, riding on her bike, and Lisa took the exact same route every single night. As Lisa was cycling home, a car approached her from behind and continually honked the horn, and they were trying to get her attention, but Lisa just kept ignoring it, and she just continued riding her bike home. And then moments later, she turned around and saw that the car was now parked on the side of the road, and it was parked next to a church parking lot. Before Lisa realized, she was yanked off her bike and she began screaming, but she said she felt the cold barrel of a gun to her head, and she was forced into that same car that had been following her this whole time. There was a man, and he threatened Lisa holding the gun to her head, and he said, "I'll blow your brains out if you don't stop screaming." He then blindfolded her, bound her, and then reclined her seat all the way back. He forced Lisa to strip, and then he asked her how old she was. Lisa lied and said she was 19 years old when in fact she was 17 years old. And then he forced her to perform oral sex on him, and then he began driving. The main thought running through Lisa's head was that her life was going to end, and that she didn't want to die despite the fact that she had been planning on ending her life just hours earlier that day. She said she was deathly afraid that he was going to kill her, and here she was thinking about killing herself, and now she was going to have to fight for her life. Kind of insane that that happened to her. And Lisa then and there decided that she was going to pull up the courage and determination to not let this happen, and she was going to fight for her life. Using her wit, Lisa knew that if she wanted to survive, she was going to have to earn her abductor's trust. She said she remembered scenes from TV crime shows and began taking note of every single thing she encountered, because she knew when she made it out of there, she was going to use these things to have this guy caught. Now this is where the story becomes truly amazing. During the drive, Lisa takes note that the car's interior was red, and it had white seats, and it had this word Magnum on the dashboard. As they were driving, Lisa somehow managed to note that they were going north. I don't know how she figured that out. I don't even know directions. She said the windows were down and she could tell they were on the interstate because of the wind velocity. She noted the car was rattling like it needed an oil change, and she says she felt the drive was around 20 minutes, and she knows they stopped by the woods because under her blindfold she could see the woods. So then he orders Lisa to get dressed, and then he grabs her arm and they start walking. As they're walking, she catches a glimpse of his number plate and she takes note of that as well. As they walk into a building, she can see that the carpet is mainly green with red and yellow specks, and she counts each step that they take. She counts that they took 19 steps. At his apartment, he forces Lisa to get undressed again, and then he takes her into the shower and begins bathing her, washing her hair, and touching her super gently. He then takes the blindfold off and tells Lisa not to look at him, and she quickly looks at him, obviously, and she sees that he has short brown hair. And during this shower experience, he would hold her very gently for a few seconds, then suddenly switch and become super aggressive. She states that one minute he was calm and then the next minute he was like a raging bull. He then puts the blindfold back on Lisa, and she was then forced to perform, sex acts, and he raped her multiple times. So he then puts the ligatures back around her arms and her legs, and then he puts her in a bed, which she realizes is a water bed. She can smell somehow that the apartment is very neat and it has this new paint smell. He then climbs over her and drags the gun across her body, sort of indicating that, I still have this gun on me. And then for the next 26 hours, he rapes her in every which way you can imagine a person can be raped. He slaps her and then he punches her a few times as well. He then orders her to go to sleep. Yeah, okay. At one point, he asks her what her name is, and she lies and says it's Carol, and he then begins to ask Lisa to describe the girls at her school and what their bodies look like and what they did when they changed in front of her at the gym. And Lisa says she just continually made things up just to get on his good side, and she remembers her grandmother's boyfriend was like this too. If she said one little thing wrong, it would set him off and he would lose his mind. He then takes her into another room and he fixes her a sandwich and gives her a soda. And at this point, Lisa is still blindfolded, but she can hear the TV show Airwolf playing on TV. And then the show is interrupted and the news comes on to say that a 17-year-old girl named Lisa is reported to be missing. And that's when it became real for Lisa that, she had been kidnapped. So Lisa begins to cry and scream. And then he once again puts the gun against her head. And he says, if you scream one more time, I'll be forced to kill you and put a bullet in your head. So stop crying. But Lisa takes note that he actually said, forced to kill you. So then Lisa takes note that, maybe he doesn't want to kill me. So then, even though Lisa was so terrified, she begins speaking to him really kindly, and she begins stroking his face and his body and telling him things that he wants to hear. And then after this, he takes her back into the bedroom and continues to rape her. And she says at this point she loses count as to how many times she was raped. And then at one point, he takes her hands and he puts it on his face. Idiot. Now she knows what he looks like. She says that he can feel he has a little mustache, he has like deep scars on his cheeks, and he has a small nose, and that he wasn't overweight and he felt very clean. When he let her use the bathroom, she ends up putting her fingerprints everywhere around the bathroom and leaving her DNA everywhere in case he does kill her. She wants the evidence to be at his property so that the police would know she was there. She asked him what his motivation was for hurting her, even though he didn't know her, and he claims that he had gone through a bit of breakup, and he said he was doing this because he was getting back at all women in general because of this terrible breakup that he had been through. Lisa then begins to think, oh my God, he's probably done this to other girls. Finally, Lisa tells him, I would have been proud to be your girlfriend. You seem like a good man, a decent man. You just seem misunderstood. Lisa then makes up a story that she was an only child and that she was living with her sick father and he needed her to take care of him, give him his medication, look after him, and that after all these hours of Lisa being missing, he was probably so worried about her. And due to this, and Lisa being so kind to him and almost acting like his girlfriend, she developed a relationship with him using reverse psychology to help her release. He ended up taking sympathy on Lisa and decided to release her and let her go. At around 3 a.m., he gets her dressed and he says, what am I supposed to do with you? And she decided to play on his emotions And while she was still blindfolded and tied up, she said, "Listen, I know you've done this to other women because of a broken relationship. It's unfortunate how we met. You seem like a really nice guy. I can take care of you. I can be your girlfriend. And I won't tell anyone how we met." And then he says, no, I can't keep you. Tell me where you live. I'll go ahead and drop you off in your neighborhood. So they get in the car, and before dropping her off, he stops at an ATM, and Lisa could see through her blindfold that they were near a Howard Johnson's motel and that there was a Quality Inn nearby. And she also saw that he was wearing a white top, jeans, and white sneakers. He gets back in the car, he tells her he's sorry, and then he drops Lisa off in her neighborhood after a 26-hour ordeal. So he makes her get out of the car. She's still blindfolded, she's still bound, and then he walks her over to an area and makes her get on her knees. He runs back to his car, and when she hears the car drive off, she pulls her blindfold down and she looks up and she says she sees this beautiful, magnificent, huge oak tree, and that's the moment that she knew that her life was going to change and that she was going to have a beautiful life. She says at that moment she saw the branches of new life. So Lisa then runs straight home, and the whole time she's looking over her shoulder because she's afraid that he's going to change his mind and come back and get her. She finally reaches her grandmother's home and she bangs on the door and she's like, "Let me in." And her grandmother's boyfriend opens up the door. She then tells them what happened, but neither of them believe her. And during the time that Lisa was missing, her grandmother actually reported her missing, but she didn't really chase up on where Lisa actually was because she thought that Lisa, had just run away. I mean, knowing what her boyfriend was doing to Lisa, she probably just assumed that Lisa was trying to escape. So when she returned just over 26 hours later, they definitely did not believe Lisa. Her grandmother's boyfriend then grabs Lisa and throws her to the ground and begins beating her for 5 hours and interrogates her, asking her where she had been and why she was cheating on him. Her grandmother finally calls Tampa Bay police and tells them, don't worry about this missing girl. She's come home and she's just made up some wild story about being abducted. The Tampa Bay police say, well, you know what? We still have to carry out an investigation. So Lisa needs to come into the station and be interrogated. Lisa states that if it wasn't for that, she probably would have killed herself later that day. At the police station, Lisa is being interviewed by a female detective, and Lisa was pretty calm while she was telling her story, and the whole time she can just tell that this female detective does not believe her, and she just wants Lisa to repeat everything over and over and over again. So Lisa finally says, you know what? No, go and bring someone more intelligent that I can talk to. The next day, Lisa goes over the same story with Sergeant Larry Pinkerton, who is in charge of sexual crimes, and she can hear him tell one of the female detectives after she tells her story to him, I believe her, go and call the FBI. So then she goes back home, and a couple days later she hears on the news that another woman's dead body had been found, and that had made 8 women who had been murdered in that same area since that spring. Lisa then thinks, you know what, it has to be the same guy who took me. So she calls Sergeant Larry and she says, come get me, I need to tell you some more information. Larry also believes that the same guy who abducted Lisa was responsible for those 8 murders that had taken place, and he was a serial killer. So Larry also needed further information from Lisa, but since she was 17 years old, she was underage, she needed permission from her, family to interrogate her further, and he actually wanted to hypnotize her to see if she remembered anything else. So he goes and he asks her grandmother, but Lisa's grandmother's boyfriend is the one who refuses and is like, no. So Larry thinks it's really odd, and then he, pushes Lisa further, and Lisa begins crying, and then she just tells Sergeant Larry what had been taking place at home for all those years. They then arrest her grandmother's boyfriend, and they put Lisa in a center for runaway teens so that he couldn't find her. Larry then brings Lisa a book of photos of suspects for her to look at, and as soon as Lisa was given the book, she identifies the man who had taken her. And she says, that's the face, I'm 110% sure. So then the police put Lisa in a car, and then they retrace the route on where she thinks the ATM could have been. And she says she recalls that she sees the name Magnum on the dashboard of the car. So then the police end up looking for Dodge Magnums in the Florida database, and they located a name, Robert Joseph Long, which they were also able to pull from the ATM transactions questions that day. So once they found out who he was and the fact that she identified him in a photo lineup, they started monitoring his comings and goings, and they saw him stuffing things into a big green trash bag outside his home, and he drained his waterbed like he was leaving town. A couple days later, they finally arrested him outside a movie theater, and that was 12 days after he abducted Lisa, but by then he had already killed 2 more women. An FBI lab also found the same red fibers on Lisa's clothes were also found on the murder victims. The red carpet fibers were also an exact match for the red interior of Robert's car. So they knew Lisa wasn't lying. And if it wasn't for Lisa, he would not have been caught. Robert Joe Long, also known as Bobby, was born in West Virginia in 1953, and he had a really troubled childhood. In the early 1980s, he raped dozens and dozens of women after using newspaper ads to find his victims. He also developed a hatred for women that began with his mother, Luella, who worked in a bar, and she often wore like racy clothing to work. And she also brought a ton of different men home with her. Making matters worse, he shared a bed with his mother till he was like 12 or 13 years old. And then in 1984, he began an 8-month killing spree, and he was arrested that November after allowing Lisa to go free. In April 1985, Bobby was convicted of first-degree murder in the Virginia Johnson case, which was the first woman he killed after he released Lisa, and Bobby then pleaded guilty to 8 other murders. Oh my god, I need to finish my lips. He was handed more than 24 life imprisonment sentences, and in the summer of 1986, he was sentenced to death by electrocution. Bobby confessed to committing over 10 murders, but he also alluded to the possibility that there were many more when he was interrogated by the police. Bobby was executed by lethal injection on 23rd May 2019, so very recently, and the execution was witnessed by Lisa, and she sat in the front row. She said she wanted to be the first person he saw before he was going to die. Lisa is now 54 years old, and she goes by the name Lisa Noland, and she still lives in the same area in Florida, and she doesn't live far from where she was actually abducted. She works as the sheriff's deputy who specializes in sex crimes, and she's been working to protect children in her area for almost 2 decades. Lisa also works as a school resource deputy and a motivational speaker, using her experience and trauma to motivate others and empower victims. She claims that her experience of sexual abuse as a young child and then, you know, her abduction and rape was her motivation to become a police officer, that she was no longer a victim. You guys have to watch the Netflix movie on this. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well portrayed, and it kind of made you understand her experience a lot better. So let me know your thoughts on this case, and if you guys decide to watch the movie, I hope you found it as interesting and as empowering as I did. Lisa is an incredible woman and so inspiring considering everything that she went through in her life. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you really enjoyed today's video. If you want to check out some other true crime videos of mine, go ahead, click over here, and I will see you in the next one, guys. Red besitos. Mwah! Bye!